You want to pray? I know they get tired of my same old stuff. Good morning. I'm going to ask you to bow. Mr. Burns is going to open us with prayer.
Y'all will bow with me. God, we thank you for the day, Lord, and we thank you for each life that's assembled here today, Lord, and we ask your blessings on each of us. Lord, grant us the wisdom to do the right thing today, Lord, and just everything that we do, Lord, I pray that it be pleasing and agreeable and acceptable to you, Lord. Should always be our consideration when we act. Lord, again, for the families and those that are in need of your blessings, Lord, as we all are, Lord, we ask for them. We thank you for loving us. Father, continue to bless us and guide us and forgive us where we fail you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Yeah. Okay, let's get started. Listen, on the wall, brevity. Brevity. Some of y'all are getting more talky than me. So let's get your business done. If we've got questions, we'll let you stay up there a little bit longer. Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Today I bring you House Bill 697 by committee substitute. It's on the last page, 4 from the bottom. It is reference to nonprofit community health centers. This bill will extend the sales tax exemption for 1 year.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, I know this is going to be hard for you. That's why I started with brevity early. I know that this is a very complicated bill, and I'm sure that you might get some questions. Mr. Jaspers.
I could just take my papers and throw them after that, right?
That's good. That's a good idea.
Depends on where. But thank you, committee, Mr. Chairman. This is House Bill 769. It's a sub brought from the Health and Human Services Committee. These are the recommendations from the Rural Development Council to address issues in rural health care in Georgia. It does the following things. It increases the ability of a rural hospital to have a Georgia licensed pharmacist to do remote order entry. It asks DCH to look at billing issues that rural providers and consumers are having, creates the Rural Center of Healthcare Innovation and Sustainability, and formalizes the creation of micro-hospitals from a closing or closed hospital, and subject to appropriations, establishes a grant program to assist with medical malpractice for rural physicians, and finally, for rural hospitals, moves the hospital tax credit from 90% to 100%, which may put up to $60 million in rural hospitals. Mr. Chairman, that's my bill.
You did better than I thought. Mr. Willard.
Thank you. Mr. Jasper, this comes out of the recommendations of the council that was set up last year.
Yes, sir.
What happened to the portion about doing away with the certificate of need on metropolitan hospitals?
Mr. Chairman, that really wasn't discussed in the Rural Health Development Council, like you said, for metropolitan hospitals. We really didn't discuss that very much, so it's best to leave it out of this and move this bill forward.
Ms. Cooper.
Thank you. This is a friendly question, but I thought we were going to wait a day since we had a question on the requirements for people that were on the boards and all taking questions. In case,
Pardon me, I didn't hear part of that.
I said it's a friendly question, and I
Yes,
thought
ma'am.
we were going to wait a day since there was a question about the requirements on rural hospitals, CEOs, and board members of education.
On the board member training.
Yes. I
That's
thought,
the beauty of the Rules Committee. I believe they can do what they want to. I'm not aware of that waiting.
I thought we were going to discuss it with the chairman. Mr. Chairman, if we could hold this possibly for one day. Thank you.
Mr. Williams.
Mr. Chairman, Mr.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
On the many hospitals, let me give you an example. The hospital closed in Wheeler County, Glenwood. There is a hospital in Vidalia Meadows. Will the mini hospital be able to get a CON in spite of it having left now?
So let's say the bill is complex, and on that part of it, Representative, the closed or closing hospital can only be taken over by a hospital that's adjacent by county to that hospital. The CON will stay with the micro hospital and the community that developed it over time.
Mr. Stevens.
Same question, Mr. Chairman. It has to do with out-of-state pharmacists and our inability as local boards to be able to pull pharmacy license, not pharmacist license. Some of us might remember, it hadn't been that long ago, that the New England pharmacy was sending in medication that was killing Georgians. Possibly even one of our own senators over here got sick. So I would ask that we hold for a day so that we could get this one question answered about pharmacists out of state versus pharmacies out of state.
Let me just tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to put this bill on for Wednesday. Y'all get your stuff worked out.
Mr. Chairman, may I answer that question, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. You know, the thing we've got to remember in remote order pharmacists, these are hospital pharmacists. They don't dispense drugs themselves. They're remote. They're in a different town. They do the order. You know, they review the order from the physician, check the records, and then put it in the patient's order. They don't touch them. Those touching of drugs are inside the hospital, and they're not there. You know, we don't need to confuse what goes on in a mail order pharmacy with what we're talking about in hospital pharmacists.
May I respond?
What?
May I respond?
I can't hear you. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, an out-of-state pharmacy that inputs an order, if they do it erroneously, our state board Our state board has no authority, that was good timing, by the way, to go in and pull a pharmacy license. They can pull a pharmacist license, but if they input an order from Oregon into the state of Georgia, you're just as dead if it's wrong.
No more questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Bye. Again, I've told y'all when it was go on the floor. That gives you today, Friday, Tuesday, and Monday. Okay? And Tuesday, for that matter. Mr. Hitchens.
Yes, bottom of the page on the modified open rule, next to the last one, House Resolution 1076. This simply asks that the federal government pay their fair share for the harbor deepening in Savannah so that we are able to discontinue having to come up with extra money to fund it every year.
No questions, thank you. Mr. Corbett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Under modified open rule, 10th down from the top or 5th up from the bottom, House Bill 876. This bill passed out of the Ag Committee yesterday with just one no vote, and it's the same no vote we had on the amended budget, so I think this makes it a good bill.
You're learning, Corey.
But anyway, all this bill does is just says that no county or municipality shall prohibit the use of wood in construction, so as long as it conforms to all applicable state minimum standard codes and fire safety standards. That's all this bill does.
No questions.
Thank you.
Ms. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I couldn't find brevity defined in code, but I think Webster will see me through. Modified Structure Rule, House Bill 161, top of page 2. This bill basically holds harmless anybody other than a pharmacist or practitioner that would be allowed to provide syringes or needles that are for human use. And in addition to that, it requires that any such entity also be available to provide counseling, education, referral, training, screening, et cetera, in a number of areas in order to, once a user gets into the system, that they would then have the opportunity to be taken care of in the most appropriate fashion. This would be managed under the Department of Public Health, and it also would provide for a registration of such syringe service program.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On the second page, about 3/4 of the way down, House Bill 782. This is the prescription drug monitoring program that allows law enforcement to share data with other states via subpoena or search warrant and streamlines the EHR records for doctors.
Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Rhodes, in reviewing the bill and discussing with other members, I hear a concern that's been raised a few times, and that is with the with ensuring that the data that we are transmitting to other states that would be allowed under this bill will be secure data. And of course, when we created the program, we had a lot of debate and discussion about how we're going to safeguard that data here in Georgia. And I think what we want to know is, what are we going to do? What will the bill require the state of Georgia to do to ensure that other states seeking access to that data have the same level of security and safeguards that the state of Georgia has in place?
Yes, sir, Mr. Witt, very good question. In this day and age, that has to be one of our major concerns. And the department already has rules and regulations in place to make sure that another entity receiving our data is up to those standards that we uphold them to. And there's also every PD, MP, we have one in every state, and there's an intrastate agreement compact that they have to sign that basically binds all the privacy laws by law.
Is there any, ma'am, Mr. Chairman, may I?
Keep on.
Is there anything in that agreement or anything in existing law that allows the state of Georgia to confirm what security measures other states have, or that would allow the state of Georgia to deny access if another state doesn't have adequate security measures?
Yes, sir. Well, our State Department has to release the information, and they do a check on the state or agency asking for the information. They have to pass all these tests before we give them the information.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Maybe I should have had that one no vote in committee, huh?
Mr. Coomer, is anything else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Kendrick.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am here requesting House Resolution 940. It's the last bill that is under open rule, and this is an urging resolution encouraging the state of Georgia to host the world's largest startup pitch competition. And a pitch competition, for those of you that don't know, is when entrepreneurs present their business plan or their business idea to a group of investors, and the investors will decide if they invest money into that business. The state of New York has the largest right now of $5 million, but they've partnered up with private organizations to do it. So this would not require state funding, but since Georgia is the #1 state to do business, I'm encouraging them to be the #1.
You have no questions. Thank you. Wait a second, Mr. Coomer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious how this pitch competition is going to help the Atlanta Braves going forward.
Well, well, in New York, it has attracted a lot of venture capital funds and venture capital money, so maybe we'll see more people moving down here and investing in more of our teams. That's all I can figure. But thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Coomer, I'm supposed to ask the stupid questions.
Noted.
Mr. Dubnik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the second page, 6 up from the bottom, House Bill 784 establishes a specialty license plate for Ducks Unlimited, a nonprofit organization.
It looks like a duck. It walks like a duck. I'm not asking it. I didn't know my mic was on.
Mr. Coomer's on a roll up here. There's no questions, but I'm going to make a statement. We've been asked already this year for numerous tags. I have been overwhelmed with the number of different ways we do tags. I'm sure, and y'all, you would be overwhelmed by the number of different tags that we have. I know that the Department of Revenue is overwhelmed. We can have tags when they come, like Mr. Dubnik's and all the rest of them that have come. I'm not singling you out, but those are requests that the organization gets part of the money. And you would not believe the different amounts of money that we get out of a $35 tag, a $25 tag, the split between them and the state. I'm not so sure that we just shouldn't put the brakes on for a second and consider how we can do this, or include all tags in one bill. And right now that's a problem because each one wants a different amount of money. Now if you are not worried about raising money, these things don't come through here. Yeah. I'm just saying, because I think I have 3 more this morning. Again, not throwing rocks, it's just a statement for y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And now I'm getting it from him, I swear. We're going to dismiss the front desk up here and just let me be up here. Ms. Scott.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Open rule the first bill, House Bill 719. This bill is to is to require housing preference for veterans who are homeless, asking the housing authorities to develop and implement policies granting housing preference to veterans who are homeless.
Ms. Scott, have you done any research on how much money it would cost to change a closed hospital over to a veterans home?
No, but I think that I think it's Spencer is looking at. He has a. I think Representative Spencer has asking for a study committee to look at that option now.
No more questions. Ms. Hughley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Isn't it true that what she's just asking for the housing authorities to utilize their facilities to give preference to veterans? She's not asking for a special veterans home. It's my understanding of the bill.
Yes.
Mr. Coomer?
Chairman, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Scott, would the entities we're talking about here, would that be like low-income housing or Title IX housing, federally regulated housing programs?
Yes, it would be all of those type of housings that the housing people have authority over. We're just asking them to implement policies and procedures so that veterans will have preference for the housing.
So my question, and you may not know right now, but if you can help find out an answer, that'd be great. My question is, would this policy violate federal regulation with regard to creating preferences for veterans? And if you know the answer, that's great, and if not, if you can help us.
No, it would not violate the federal policy. I did speak with HUD, and this is just an addition to the housing that the federal government has with the Department of Veteran Affairs. It would not violate the federal policy laws by them coming up and implementing a plan to work with homeless veterans. So we're not asking them to violate any federal laws. It would go along with the federal thing in trying to get homeless veterans off the street.
Thank you.
So it's not in violation of the federal law.
Thank you.
Let me apologize in that maybe I am confusing it with another bill. Mr. Hawkins?
None. Katie.
Okay. Ms. Dempsey?
Hey, Ms. Scott. Also, I have an excellent, really a premier housing authority in my district. It's quite an example for our state. But I'm well aware, too, of many of the boundaries and policies that they have in place that would we want to make sure that this doesn't in any way supersede anything that the local control has, because they are the watchdogs for any unlawful activity within those developments that also can remove someone from their list, such as drug or any kind of abuse that goes on. So I'm just checking with you to make sure if you haven't got that in there, you might want to look into that with Legislative Council as well.
Okay, so what this is doing is asking the housing authorities to come up with the plan, to come up with the policies and implement the plan. It's not trying to supersede any plans that they already have in place. All it's doing is asking them to develop and implement policies, granting housing preference to homeless veterans, asking them to do it. So they will come up with the rules, and they will come up with everything that they need to have in this policy so that the homeless veterans can be granted preference.
So if that veteran had even in another county or another housing authority entity, broken some of their policies. Is there a way to track that and make sure that we're not giving preference to someone who is already in violation? Because it's a hard line for them to deal with, but is why many people are actually not in public housing.
Well, I will say that the housing people already have policies and guidelines, and this will be just one more thing that is added on, and they will still look at the same qualifications they look at to put anyone else in housing. And if that soldier or that veteran have something that would prohibit them from being in housing, then they will have that information just like they do on others as they go and apply for housing. All I'm doing is asking for them to give veterans preference.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I see what the lady is trying to do, but isn't there a difference between implementing policies that in the affirmative grant the preferences versus asking them to do that? Wouldn't that be more of a sort of an urging resolution, if you would, to urge them to do this versus implementing policies that grant it? In other words, in the affirmative saying you must do this. Again, I see what the lady's trying to do, but it seems as if with a general bill, you're telling.
Okay.
No more questions. Thank you, Ms. Scott.
Okay.
Mr. Caldwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring to you today House Bill 704 on the first page under Modified Open Rule. It is just above your third hole punch there. It's currently illegal for a contractor to bury garbage in your yard after they build your house, but it takes, on average, about 2 decades to find that garbage, but our law limits you to 8 years to actually hold that contractor accountable. This bill would remedy that for you, make sure your constituents can hold people who are already breaking the law accountable for thousands of dollars worth of damage on their property.
Mr. Coomer. He waves, okay. Ms. Smith.
Thank you. I'm over here to your far right.
There you are.
Thank you. There's such legal terminology that goes in with different types of landfills and what can be buried on property.
Yes, ma'am.
So garbage is not that word. It would be debris, it'd be construction debris in that terminology. The other implies methane gas and those types of things. So just a matter of clarification.
Yes, ma'am. We do have construction debris is defined within the code, and we're referencing that.
All right, but the incorrect word is garbage.
You're correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
No more questions. Mr.
Thank you, sir.
No. Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I bring to you HB 759. It's a third bill on the front page under the open rule, which would basically address an issue that once a child reaches eligibility for the special needs scholarship, they would keep their eligibility.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. On the modified structured rule, HB 766, I too have a special license plate tag for Alabama A&M University to go toward scholarships for Georgia students.
No questions. It's good.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Stovall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Rules Committee. I come before you requesting HB 493, which is on the second page and fifth from the top. And this particular bill is a transparency bill in government where it will require any local government, whether it's the city council, commissioners, or school board, to, if they are videotaping their regular scheduled meetings, that they must include public comment time. And Mr. Chairman, I do understand that there's an amendment offer to this bill.
There is, and Ms. Jones, would you do the amendment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's an amendment that I understand the author agrees to that just adds a couple nuances so that if there's technical difficulty, that is excused by the local government, but also it makes it easier for the local government to implement this such that their video records would be maintained in accordance with their records retention policy. And we worked with ACCG and GMA, and they came up with the language for this.
Has anybody got a question on that amendment? I want to get it out of the way quick. This is just an amendment that would be approved by the Rules Committee. It's not a Rules Committee amendment. Do I hear it move? Is it, all those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Ms. Bentley.
All right, thank you. I was about to say, are you finished with it?
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman and the members of the committee. I bring to you for the third time, I've been told the third time, Mr. Charm. On the last page, on the structure
You've been lied to again.
Under structure rule, on the last page, is House Bill 735. Expenditures on the maintenance of a railroad track owned or leased by a Class 3 railroad company, short line rails, and this is a recommendation of the Rural Advisory Council.
Ms. Bentley?
Yes, sir.
I think that I had asked for an amendment on that bill, and after further discussion and digging, I don't need the amendment, so we don't want to mess with the way you got the bills, the way it should go on the floor.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. No more questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Page 2, modified structure. The third and fourth bills down, back to back. House Bill 365 is the bill to add $10,000 in benefit to the sheriff's life insurance policy. And then right below it, House Bill 473 is the bill that would add some help to the service dogs to make sure they have access everywhere, and it also would make it a misdemeanor for somebody to intentionally try to pull off their pet as a service animal to gain access.
No questions, thanks.
Thank you.
Ms. Light.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am here to present on the first page, HB 835, modified open rule midway down. This bill allows the Department of Revenue to offer a temporary license for off-premises sales of tobacco products. Currently, they're required to obtain and file under separate sales tax IDs. It does not affect any of the local smoking ordinances in any way, but the purpose of this bill is for ease of filing.
Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe there's a little golf tournament over in Augusta that they have a hard time selling cigars to the patrons because we lack your bill. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
You mean, no offense to my right hand over here, you mean that what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the Masters in Augusta, and I'm going to be sitting up there on the 7th green, and those two ladies next to me are smoking cigars? Let me change that. Those two gentlemen and that lady are next to me smoking cigars. Is that right?
No, sir, they won't be sitting next to you. There's special trees for that.
Look at that. I thought that was... I I thought that those special trees were when you couldn't make it to those little green buildings.
That might be the case.
Have I lost control? Hey, that's what it's supposed to be. Thank you. Ms. Chandler.
That one's a hard one to follow. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring you HB 713 under modified structure rule, the 10th one down. This bill simply allows for ineligible students to receive the Zell if they have a percentile at the 91st level on an SAT or an ACT going into college rather than retroactively. It does not in any way lower the standards for one to receive the Zell Miller.
Mr. Fleming? No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm asking for H.R. 888, that's on page 1, third from the bottom.
That's the one, let me interrupt you, that's the one I had confused with Ms. Scott. Okay,
and simply what this does is create a study committee to answer many questions that will have to be asked to get answers to in terms of how we could go about converting the closed rural hospitals that have already shut down into potential homes for veterans.
Well, at that study committee, they would come up with how much the cost is going to be to convert.
If I have that, a little bit of an idea of how that would go, if you would indulge me for just a moment. The state veterans homes per diem program, a lot of it would start with this. A lot of this is heavily subsidized by the federal government, obviously because the VA is involved. But this is called their per diem. So the 2008 nursing home care per diem is currently $74.42. For the domiciliary care, it is about $34.40 for adult daycare. And then the goal was to get the, right now Congress there is a federal statute that requires them to subsidize the cost to 75%. And so I am bringing another resolution, should this resolution come to the floor and pass, to urge the federal government to fund that program.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Chairman and committee members. I bring House Bill 750. It's eighth from the bottom under modified open, and it's a bill that just shows that we honor all the veterans who have answered the call to serve our country in wartime or peacetime by allowing a free driver's license as long as they have the paperwork and all that to show and that they have met the requirements. And right now, you're not allowed a free driver's license if you've served during peacetime. And I say that we did not choose war; the war chose us. I get a free driver's license, but I believe all veterans should deserve the same honor of appreciation as I get. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
I think my question the other day was, how many are we talking about?
I think the numbers do not show exactly. I know I'm able to get a free driver's license, and because you have to bring your DD-214, and I think any of us who are veterans, if I asked you where that DD-214 is, you would not know exactly where it's at. You know, you'd have to go dig it up. So usually I pay for mine. And so it's more of I think, an appreciation just to say you can get a free driver's license, because right now a lot who can get it, they just pay for it. I mean, I know I go to the DMV and I just pay $32. But I think it's more just to show the appreciation, to say Georgia's military friendly. It's more of a thank you. But the numbers are more kind of skewed to say exactly how many could. You could say there are around 700,000 veterans in Georgia, but then again, not all of them are going and getting the free driver's license. And I think if we even ask the veterans in this room, most of them probably do not even use it, who have been to war or served during wartime.
Next question, do we know how many people take advantage of it now?
No, sir.
Find out those two things.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Efstration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Rules Committee. I bring to you at the top of page 2, House Bill 121 under modified structured. Again, House Bill 121. This is an issue that predates my time in my current position. It's a passion of mine, and that is the rule against perpetuities and Georgia's trust code. I say that somewhat facetiously because it is the fear of all first-year law students. But the bottom line is currently in Georgia, our trust code has not been updated, so Georgians are traveling to neighboring states to have their trust drawn. This bill is only brought at the request of the State Bar of Georgia with their approval, as well as the approval of Professor Mary Radford, who's the well-known name professor at Georgia State in this area, and it's not covering any other issue in the trust area. Would ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Brockway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Under open rule, the fifth one down, HR 744. It's the one I brought to you yesterday, just asking for it again. It's an urgent resolution to try to shame the Georgia Occupational Regulatory Review Council into doing all of its job. And I'll be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Blackman.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Ask for your consideration of House Bill 327. It's on page 3, the first under structured, and it addresses a number of fixes and provisions within the title ad valorem tax code section. In an effort to be brief, sir.
Mr. Trammell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does the change in valuation, the way the used cars are valued, does that mean that there'll be an increase in tax for people who purchase used cars?
I think that the fiscal note would speak to the fact that there is a variance with respect to a book value versus retail. And in order to close that loophole, we have gone to retail and not the greater of the two. So we're waiting on an adjusted fiscal note. The intent is to bring the tax down for all motor vehicle sales. And that's what we've done, and eliminated a possible trigger that would include millions, hundreds of millions of dollars up to the 9% that is in the current tax code. So the short answer to your question is yes, but there are a number of other things that relate to that would allow us to bring the potential tax down and the current rate, effective rate, down from 7 to 6 3/4. Thank you for your question.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Blackman, my friend, I just want to be clear on this because what you explained was a little differently from what I understood. And my concern is for particularly the lower end used cars, and lower end now is under 20,000. But the cost, when you're talking about taxing on retail value, excuse me, instead of how it's taxed now on book value. And am I not correct, or do you need to clarify that?
Well, I'll try to answer this as quickly as I can. Mr. Representative, I appreciate the question. What we're finding now and what we're trying to do by closing this loophole is eliminate the ability to have a car on your lot that is listed at $20,000 where the book value may be pretty close to $20,000. You bring in a trade that is worth $10,000, and then I decide as a auto dealer, and it is allowable under current law, to bump the sale price up to $30,000, give you $20,000 for your trade, and valuate the sale at book value, thus rendering TAVT at a near zero amount. And that is frankly the loophole that we're trying to close. And anytime you're going to close a loophole, to Representative Trammell or Leader Trammell's point, you're going to see, I think, an additional dollars of revenue that come forward because of that. Now, the other part of your question, Mr. Representative, I would say that We have not done a means test, I don't think, on TAVT legislation, and I talked to a gentleman a couple of weeks ago that bought a Corvette for $70,000 used. And then I had another friend that purchased a Toyota Corolla at roughly $15,000. Now, that's a new Toyota Corolla. So I guess my comment back to you would be is should we treat those two differently? And I would submit that what we're doing is leveling the playing field and making it fair and equitable for all Georgians.
Brief follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Brief.
Quick.
I just want to make sure, because I know Warner Robins is prosperous. Most folk in my district don't buy used $70,000 cars. I'm concerned about the low end, but we'll talk about that.
Well, that was actually a retired military person, much like yourself, Representative Williams, that I spoke to.
Ms. Hughley.
Mr. Chairman, my seatmate answered my question. It's probably wrong.
Mr. Martin.
Love my new friend. Isn't it true that the fiscal note, we're getting calls from people talking about the tax increase. Isn't it true that when the bill was originally drawn on used car sales, it was going to book versus book or hire or retail, whichever is higher? So you could go book to retail before, and now you're having to go retail to retail.
That was the language that passed with 3 dissenting votes out of the House last year. Right. And yes, sir, we did change that and drop it down to retail versus the higher of.
Right, so we're going to retail now.
Yes, sir, Mr.
So
Chairman.
we have the delta. And isn't it true you expect the fiscal note when it gets back to be more in line with reality than it was
It would
before?
be. I mean, we also have to assume that, and I think this is footnoted in the fiscal note, that we have a $70 million reduction in TAVT based on the leasing changes that we approved last year. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. The effective rate would lower from 7 to 6 3/4 for all sales of motor vehicles. Yes, sir. Thank you for your question.
Mr. Stevenson.
You know, my folks back in Savannah, they just want the bottom line. And I want to make sure that I'm real clear on this. Today, the rate is 7% that they pay for a title fee. After this bill passes, it goes down to 6.75. Is that not correct? And is it not also correct that the potential for even an increase of 2%, which is in today's law, would go away?
Those are both correct. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that question. No more questions. Get out of the way.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Braddock. All right. How am I supposed to do?
I know that last name thing's confusing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I have is House Bill 833 for the professional land surveyors, and they have asked that we change the requirements to remove hydrology from their licensing and educational requirements, because that's starting to live in the engineering space, and they want more appropriate educational classes that really fit their licensing and what they're doing on a regular basis.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Tillery. This is a senator, in case y'all wonder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to come.
And he did correctly. He got in the back of the line.
It took a long time, too, Mr. Chairman. It took a while. Members of the committee, I asked you to look at the bottom of page 2, Senate Bill 131. It's some language that actually came through the Rules Committee last year and ended up with an amendment that we couldn't get through at the end, and so I ask you to consider that again. It also has several House changes this year, House improvements, so I ask that you please favorably consider this bill.
No questions. Thank you. All right. Committee, you got any? Let's go. Mr. J. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that House Resolution 238, it's on the yellow sheet, be recommitted to Ways and Means.
It's a resolution. It's on the yellow sheet.
Yes, sir.
And it's a motion to move it
Back to Ways and Means.
Back to Ways and Means. Got a second? All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's gone. Who? Mr. Stevens. Ron. Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Chairman, in an effort to help the Atlanta Braves, I'd like to put my name beside H.R. 940, the pitch competition.
Mr. Williamson.
Chairman, I'd like to ask for House Bill 780, the Department of Banking and Finance's annual house bill.
Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name by House Bill 697. This is sorely needed in the rural areas.
697?
697.
Ms. Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for House Bill 798. It is a special license plate tag, but it only modifies. It doesn't change anything, but unfortunately, one of the unintended consequences of a bill we had last year allowing for a registration process for volunteer fire departments, some of our local tax commissioners decided that volunteer firefighters were registered and not certified, so therefore were ineligible. They became ineligible for the firefighter tag. So this is just correcting that. It also adds a public safety piece for our fire chiefs whenever they terminate a firefighter. As the current law stands, they have to go and reclaim the firefighter tag, putting themselves at risk. This allows the terminated firefighter to just turn it in at the local tax commissioner's office for a regular tag. Thank you.
Y'all, we've done the beekeeper, right? There's 6 on here. Just to let you know. Ms. Dempsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask for HB 646, the tightly drawn limited bariatric pilot, to continue the study to make sure that this is cost-effective and life-saving for those who are in the state health benefit plan.
We are still trying to get some information on that, aren't we?
I thought we met yesterday. Do you need more? I mean...
No, I'm just... Hello, she's doing her job.
We did.
But we were looking for more information. Been some provided yesterday afternoon on the outcomes of some of these things. And what it is you can't have very good outcomes in just 2 years. And this is an extension. Mr. A. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On modified open, I'd like to ask for HB 670. This is your council interstate compact for juvenile supervision. Right now, the speaker and the lieutenant governor make one legislative appointment. This says that they would both have a legislative appointment, one from the House, one from the Senate. I'd also like to ask under modified structure, House Bill 721. This would authorize the Department of Driver Services to do third-party testing with the licensed driving schools. Take some of the burden off of them for teaching some of these or getting some of the licensees, the juveniles.
Mr. Powell, I would ask that you tell the Department of Driver Services to come see me on that one.
I'll certainly do that. And thirdly, I'd like to put my name beside HB 856 under modified open. This is a bill that adds the Commissioner of Community Supervision to the Board of Public Safety in an ex officio role. We've always tried to keep all the law enforcement agencies giving them representation on that board.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to put my name by HB 782, Representative Rhodes' bill for the prescription monitoring.
Mr. Trammell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name by H.R. 940, Representative Kendrick's bill under open rule, and by House Bill 493, Representative Stovall's bill under modified structure.
Ms. Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside House Bill 738, Representative Aller's bill relative to the probate courts. And I'm also going to take a chance and ask for House Bill 766 once we get the tag bill straightened out.
Is Dewey going to send any of that money to Alabama?
It's going to all go to Alabama. Pay it in.
they're
board.
Georgia students.
We're gonna send that money to Alabama. That's A&M. Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to tag along there and ask for HB 815, a special license plate for the Georgia Masonic Charities. This actually already exists. I think we did it last year or the year before. The tag exists. They failed to put it in the column so that $10 can be sent to help those kids down in Millersville at the Masonic home. I asked your consideration for that. Won't take the Revenue Department doing anything but sending that money in-state to help Georgia kids.
Mr. Beverly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside HB 672, Motor Vehicles Bill and Modified Open Rule, and beside HB 719, Open Rule First Bill. Thank you.
Wait a second. What was the last one?
HB 719.
Mr. Smyrie.
Chairman, I'd like to put my name by H.R. 940 on the upper rule, Representative Kendrick's bill, and House Bill 493 as amended by Representative Stovall under a modified structure rule.
Ms. Tankersley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to place my name by Representative Chandler's bill. It's under modified structure rule, House Bill 713, relevant to post-secondary Hope and Zell Miller eligibility requirements relative to students who graduated from an ineligible high school.
Mr. Knight. Never mind. Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to put my name beside H.R. 940, HB 493, and HB 766 for Georgia students is coming back to Georgia.
Okay, let's start. We're setting the calendar for Tuesday. Remember, you don't need to show up Monday. So Tuesday, under modified open, HB 670. Have a move and a second. All those in favor signify by aye. All those opposed, same sign. It's on. Under modified open, HR 1076. Got 2 moves, 3 moves. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's on. Under modified structure, HB 717. All those in favor signify by aye. Same sign for those opposed. It's modified structure, HB 780. Move, 2 moves. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? Under structure, HB 327. All those in favor signify by aye. Opposed, same sign. It's structured HB 693. Moving a second. All those in favor signify by aye. Any opposed? It's under structured HB 816. All those in favor signify by aye. Opposed, same sign. See ya.